Vinod, you have done evaluations almost all your professional career and many, many years from multilateral development banks, and looked particularly maybe at multilateral development banks and disasters. So why is it you think risk accumulation is allowed to go on at such a speed and we haven't managed to change practices?
Well, thank you very much. I also want to pay tribute to this event and for all the work. I guess many of your practitioners were actually doing it. As an evaluator, we've looked at it almost like someone from another planet, but try to make sense of the effect all the projects have made. 10 years of disaster projects at the World Bank, and we are currently doing similarly 10 years of disaster projects at the ADB. Let me just give perhaps 3 highlights which connects to the chair's question, which honestly really links back to what Makoto-san and Kiyoshi-san and Jay and Margareta said. So in a way you are seeing kind of a consensus on many things, and the question then will be, what do we do with this and what happens after the seminar? But for the moment, first of all, in all the sectors that we have looked at, the so-called disconnect between what you kind of know and what happens on the ground is about the highest when it comes to natural disasters, augmented by the effect of climate change, and I'll come back to that as a question mark. And Asia in particular is highly vulnerable. All the figures point to that, 7 out of 10 cities, the degree of urbanization that's likely to happen. Asia is less urbanized than Latin America, but if you add 1.2 billion people in 2020, or take just Jakarta, Greater Jakarta could be 35 million people, that is a dramatic change in a short time. Even Latin America hasn't seen that. So how to deal with that? So when you look at across the sectors, the urgency, the scale, and including the financing, while taking Kiyosha-san's point, the sheer scale of the financing are dramatic issues for Asia. In that connection, one of the things evaluation suggests is it is not just the money, it's the knowledge. And it's just striking how good examples and bad examples of how to do and how not to do across the world, not just Asia, just stare in your face, and the knowledge exchange that could dollar for dollar perhaps even produce greater impacts often don't get tabled. And if there is time, I'd like to give some examples of some of the most striking things where Turkey or Colombia or the Philippines or Indonesia have done certain things right or wrong, what have you, that could add up to some significant changes. Aside from the scale and the urgency, the second thing that strikes us is that something about the nature of the problem escapes policy and for not any evil intentions, but by the nature of the incentives that exist. When you put in prevention and climate change into the equation, this becomes even more dramatized. But there is something about the short term and the long term. The difference between the impact on the rich and the poor. What I gain versus what everybody else gains. And simply put, this not figuring in the growth equation of finance ministries is a fundamental motivational reason why it seems like natural disaster actions are seen as something aside of development, an irritant, an additional thing you have to do, but not one that fosters development. And so that change would, one, give greater predictability for the factoring in of disaster protection into the development plans, and also make it more effective. In the large numbers of projects we looked at in countries where disasters strike again and again, you don't know exactly when and you don't know exactly where, but you know it will strike. Half of them don't even mention disaster protection in the country assistance strategies or the national plans of the countries. Where you have projects, 7 out of 10 don't have repeater projects, so the maintenance side is totally out of the picture. And when you add the need for prevention, it gets even more dramatic. You know, firefighters spend less than 10% of the time fighting fires. The rest of it is prevention. So that piece is coming in. I mean, the new disaster strategies of the World Bank and the ADB factor these in, but this is not still mainstreamed or deeply embedded. And I'd like to suggest that there is a fundamental motivation issue. Some would like to call it a market or government failure. And then third, there are things that ought to be done, can be done, and maybe just from the angle of the multilateral development banks to be accountable from that side. The cost-benefit analysis, some of the numbers, they are not translated into operational implications. Just the rates of return calculations don't feature disaster implications. If you did that, that could almost force the hand. People do stare at these things, make them public, make them widely available, and that sometimes, what gets measured gets done. So if you don't measure it, you can talk a lot, but it doesn't stick and the traction is missing. As I said, the country assistance strategies, etc., build them in and make that a requirement. Why not? I mean, we do so many other things that way. And then the follow-up point I made, one-off loans or one-off actions without the follow-up really could, I have a lot of examples where actually sometimes they do more harm than good, but not always. And then let me close with the point on communications that was mentioned. This is so important because at the end of the day, if the traction and the incentives are an issue, it's not just the finance minister, the politicians and the public need to see this very much as in their own interest. One, in the national interest. Two, in the interest today, not for tomorrow. That distinction has to be there. And just knowing about what is happening will help. Australia, I think, has developed these inundation maps showing how low-lying areas really in detail could be affected by a 0.5 to 1.1 increase in sea level by 2100. That seems to have affected awareness. In the Philippines, the geoscience department has what typhoons could do in various parts, and publicizing it, putting it in the newspapers, everyone having the same information could do wonders. So let me stop here and come back as you like.